ליאיר לפיד.
Thank you, Mr. Yair Lapid.
אני חושב שאנחנו שמענו
I
עכשיו
think that
נאום
we have just now heard a speech that definitely tallies with what we refer to as national resilience, not only the military and security, but also the national resilience. This chapter of our conference that deals with the Israeli society, its future, and where it is headed. And we are going to continue here in this very topic in the upcoming session. This is going to deal with Israeli society and will deeply analyze the gaps and tears that threaten Israeli society. I'm honored to present Dr. Sigal Shelach.
Dr.
Shelach joined in 2007-2012. She was appointed Director General of Joint, and she has been serving as a General Director of Joint Israel. Prior joining Joint, she was a senior researcher at the Ministry of Industry. Joint Israel, if you do not know, it is the Social Development Center of Israel. Joint has invested over 10 billion shekels in the social development of Israel. The organization is developing social services together with government, local municipalities, and other services for the fragile populations in our society. Dr. Shelach, the floor is yours. It is my honor. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon almost. It is definitely a great honor being here at the Herzliya conference. Its organization and speakers, all important guests, have convened for one purpose: to see how together we take care of a better future for all, particularly for next generations who choose to live here in the state of Israel. When we talk about a ticking bomb, usually what comes to mind is a very clear and immediate danger, a life danger, and indeed a very large portion of the conference discusses these very topics. However, what happens when this bomb is amongst us or within us? What happens if, in order to be strong enough to handle threats from outside, we need social and economic resilience in order to obtain this important cause? So allow me to use this term referring to the social challenges that we all will be facing in the upcoming years. These challenges are already here. Some are more overt, some are more covert, but all are a real danger to a continuation of a healthy life, sustaining life, inclusive life, where the equality of opportunities is not a theory only. I'd like to share with you an organizational journey we have been in Joint Israel with our partners in the government, in local municipalities, together with our board members in the United States who represent Jewry of the diaspora, civil society in Israel, and representatives from the business and industry in Israel. This journey led us to look into Israeli society, to look at ourselves and to find the main challenges that we, as a partnership between Israeli government and Joint, view as the central ones, and select 7 of these where we want to focus our efforts in the upcoming 7 years. And the idea that organizes it all is that in order to bring a change about, we need to enlarge the focus and to create indices in order to work together and measure things. In the beginning of this journey, we dove into comparative data, as we all do, and we want to find out what we need to deal with. And we discovered a beautiful picture. They refer to us as a startup nation, and indeed we are. We are number 1 in the rate of employees in the OECD, high-tech employees. We are leaders, number 1 R&D for GDP. We are very low at the rate of unemployment nowadays. We are very high at the rate of higher education, etc., etc. So we want and we invest in being excellent. We also know how to be number one amongst the developed economies in Israel. But we also know how to excel in being last. And this picture that you can see in front of you is where we excel in gaps, mainly in Israel. So inequality, for example, in education achievement, we're number 26 out of 26 countries that were surveyed at the OECD. The rate of adults that are being tested for skills, the PS test, we are there rated at the bottom third part. Poverty rates, we also excel number 34 out of 35 countries in the OECD. And of course, the number of poor people in Israel is very high. This data brought us to think about our role as partners with the government, as an organization that has been working for 100 years in 70 countries, but as of the 1970s has been cooperating with the government and social R&D. We're developing social services of tomorrow. What is our role? Where do we need to focus? So we opened up all data, all textbooks, the agenda, the socioeconomic agenda and the plans of the Ministry of Finance, various ministries, plans, the Brookdale, the Tau data, and the Aharon Institute was in the IDC, and many other companies who deal with this, like McKinsey and others. And we mapped the challenges, particularly the social, economic challenges. We wanted to see what are the main ones that are very important to our partnership with the government. We mapped 33 such challenges. The 33 challenges, some are challenges that stem from social gaps, and some are challenges in absolute terms. By the way, our education system currently in Israel has an absolute gap according to the PISA test, but from other OECD education systems, we are at a gap regarding many different comparative data. Together with our partners, we did work that continued for about 8 months, trying to crystallize the 7 challenges that we can put forth for the next 7 years, and we mapped 7 such challenges. They divide into 3 main areas, and the 4th one that you can see marked in red is that of systemic challenges. Together with the government, we need to resolve them in order to enable for these roads, so to speak, that will enable us to resolve problems will work properly. And with your permission, I'll take you a little bit into our kitchenette, talking about the data, the indices, in order to see what we are talking about. So we're going to start with the challenge of social mobility in Israel. Checking mobility compared to the OECD, Israel is at a phenomenal place. If you take a child from the bottom quarter who lives in Tel Aviv and you follow and want to see what happens to this child compared to his parents, he has a chance of 22% of reaching the top quarter. This is phenomenal. It's almost 100%. 25% is 100% actually here. But at the same time, and I guess it's not surprising, but looking at the numbers, when you look at certain population in the society, you see that, for example, the ultra-Orthodox or amongst Arab society, and here we also have people of Ethiopian origin, but we also see it in very weak local municipalities. There is a situation of huge gaps in the ability to mobilize oneself from the financial situation of the parents and make it to a better situation as a child. And there is a very big gap. It needs to be tested with multiple tools. It's not only education. It's not only treating the parents' poverty. This is a problem that will testify as to our future. In addition to social mobility, we looked at what is happening currently. We are talking about several years' time projection, but what is happening right now? The situation right now is difficult. The basic contract between the citizen and the state that says, I'm working, and this is supposedly going to enable me to work and live with dignity. We have a very difficult time in fulfilling this contract nowadays. These are the rates of the poor employees in the world, in developed countries, and look at where Israel is situated as far as percentage go. We're together with Mexico and Turkey, Chile. We're not in a good place. There is something like 450,000 people who live in both working full-time, but they're still poor. It's not only Arab society, it's not only among the ultra-Orthodox. We know that a family with 1.5 working parent that has 2 children is very, very close to the poverty line, and this is according to the report of National Security. The problem becomes even more acute when we look at the here and now of those who are about to retire. Talking about poor employees, people in the middle or low status or about to retire. We know that only 55% of them are going to have a pension. It's true that we had a low pension in 2008. We expect these rates to grow. However, the rate of the change or alteration of pension is very low. For men, it's 75%. For women, 63%. If you come from a low salary check and you're going to retire and you get a very low pension or not at all, then, of course, there's a growing chance of being poor. So we talked about mobility. We talked about a situation where there is an immediate danger for employees that are close to poverty line. And what came out very strongly from the data is something that comes in all of the conversation is the population growing older. We know that in Israel, the number of people who are above the age of 65 will grow from 1 million to 2 million within 20 years' time. And this topic, which puts us in a different place from where we have been in the previous years, where we used to be a young country, this changes the treatment or the way we look at it. Is it sustainable? Can the state of Israel hold this situation, so to speak? We know that people that have difficulty of functioning, or the number of them is going to grow from 10% to about 32% within a decade. These are great implications on the budget, the state budget. Great implications, and we have to look forward and see how we are going to handle this problem. As for functioning, perhaps we can also relate to people with disabilities. So it is true that we're not so different from the rest of OECD, but we're not progressing anyway. We're pretty static as far as employment rates are concerned, and we're very high in the we still have a lot of work that needs to be done. So what do I want to say? I'd like to tell you that we have a challenge, a very big challenge that we're facing in the present as well as in the future. And we can do a lot, however, we need to do it together. And looking at the data, and I must say on a personal note as well, there's something a bit discouraging. How do you even begin to deal with such huge problems? And I'd like to quote Desmond Tutu, who said,
little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world.
This means that if each and every one of us will do their own small share in doing good, in this case it is social economic good, together we'll manage to do a lot of good. And before I end with this quote, I would like to say that all of these aspects include benefits for the individual, but also benefits for the entire country. And we have to understand how the country will sustain itself economically with proper handling of these problems. This is very important as a point of view, and I go back to the place I began with, the place of social economic resilience. Israel has to be strong from within, has to have social cohesion, and this is done when the population has faith. It knows that it can make a good living in the state and strong as a country in order to handle the internal as well as external challenges. So I wish to say thank you very much and to allow the next panel to occur.
We're not parting from Sigal Shelach. And so I'd like to now invite the panel who's going to run this moderated discussion. It will be led by Professor Alex Mintz, who is the Provost at the IDC Herzliya. Professor Mintz is a researcher who is renowned around the world for his academic research and about decision-making in politics, computerized decision-making, and analysis of foreign policy. Recently, he was awarded the Israeli Political Science Association's prize for his life work. We're going to have Mr. Yoav Kraiem participating, who is also well known. He is a co-director of the Community Development and Social Change Department at the Beit Issie Shapiro, and he teaches at the Occupational Therapy faculty at the Kiryat Ono Academy. Professor Yossi Matias is a mathematician and a VP engineering specialist and won the Gödel Prize. He is the VP of engineering, as I mentioned, at Google. Professor Michal Grinstein-Weiss. Shanti Kanduka.
Associate Dean for Policy
He's saying it in English.
Director, Social Policy Institute in Washington University in St. Louis, USA. דוקטור מוחמד אל-נברי, שהייתה לי הזכות הגדולה להכיר אותו, האיש על שמו רשומים
to know him. He has 3 medical patents in his name, but he left things to one side on the back burner to work in the social side of life, and that he is the former mayor of Hura. And now Ms. Shira Greenberg, chief economist. Her specialization is in macroeconomics, and she has international ties in this field, and she works at the Ministry of Finance. The floor is yours, Professor Alex Mintz. Well, shalom one and all. At the Herzliya Conference 2015 at the IDC, the very famous speech by our President Rivlin was given about the 4 tribes, and of course there were reverberations, very positive ones, that echoed from it. But basically what was being said, that there is no longer a clear majority and minority, but rather 4 tribes that demographically speaking are slowly becoming closer and closer to each other in size. And the 4 that were mentioned then. Nearly 50% of people in first grade, children in first grade, will not serve in the IDF when they reach the draft age, and half of Israeli society do not adopt the Zionist ethos. And in addition to that, he said that the 4 tribes each try and sort of draw people in their direction. That's not exactly national resilience, is it? But in order to establish some kind of cohesion and approximation between the various tribes, he suggested an initiative, a great one, an Israeli hope, Tikva Israelit, in education, in the academe, in sport in the various local communities, etc. And we also contributed our humble contribution in a kind of sort of center with various position papers and discussions, a kind of think tank. And we sat down with the president and deliberated all these. In other words, the Israeli hope in the academe, especially. But since that speech in 2015, there's no secret that Israeli society, instead of actually lowering those flames, instead we see belligerence and we see an inflammation. And we see those flames growing that is extremely rifting and treacherous. We've undergone an ugly, in my opinion, election campaign, and now this rifting is also within the tribes themselves and not only between the tribes. So Professor Nisak, may he rest in peace, and Dan Horowitz, may he rest in peace, described how deeply rifted and deeply divided our society is. It's not just left and right. And by the way, it has emanated since really the inception of the State of Israel, but it has deeply rifted all of us. And we can see that it's not only just left and right, but it's between the tribes and within them. On this distinguished panel today, there are representatives of all the sectors, from the academe, from high tech. We have a senior representative, Professor Yossi Matias, the VP in Engineering in World Google, and we have from the public, and we also have the non-profit organizations represented. So I wanted to hear what each of your sectors have contributed to the bridging of these gaps into a sort of more common denominative kind of trend between the various tribes in Israel. So let us start with Michal and the world of the academe. Well, thank you very much, Alex. Yes, I think that the Israeli hope is extremely important. Hatikvah HaYisraelit, it needs to be underpinned more. I think that one of our victories with this sharing of governance and education was the Saving for Each Child plan that took us 4 years to bring it from the States, where it actually was initiated, with similar legislation in other countries as well. And we did win with that in 2015 when we implemented it in 2017. I think you all know about that law, but I'll just quickly overview it. And that opens a savings account for each child under the age of 18. That was in 2017 when we did a rollout for all the population, and each month 50 shekels is deposited in that child's account on his or her name, and this sum will be then available for him or her at the age of 18 or at the age of 21, of course subject to parents' permission at the age of 18. So each child at the age of 21, when a new generation joins the workforce, he will have an initial preliminary sum that will be similar to all and shared by all. Now that is the good news. So there was tremendous excitement surrounding this law, and people did actually elect, I believe, much more so, nearly 70% in 2017 when that rollout of the law started, and they were very active. That's the good news. But alongside, there's also a sense of trepidation and fear from analyses that we have carried out with the National Insurance Institute. One of our first sort of senses of trepidation and fear about that was that in the weakened, more vulnerable groups of population, we felt as if this was actually made more extreme. So, for example, 75 did actually choose to add another 50 shekels to that deposit, but amongst the Arabs, less than 50% chose to actually deposit an additional 50 shekels to match that investment. So 60% of the Jewish population, the non-religious, decided to invest that in various funds with a sort of relatively middle size or higher level of risk, while And the religious ones were in halachic kind of sort of associations and investment, and others invested in the bank where the interest was going to be 1.5%. Why is that important? Because based on our forecast for a population group that invested in a bank and did not match with an additional 50%, at the age of 21, it'll about 12,000 shekels, which is a significant sum, which should perhaps even cover the first year of tuition at a university. But on the other hand, the stronger population that did add that 50 matching shekels, that actually went for those venture capital funds, etc., with a sort of high risk or middle side, they actually managed to invest enough that would reach a sum that they would be able to cover the second and even third year of their tuition fees, which actually only deepens the gap. So what we've done with the insurance in the National Insurance Institute is we have tried to enhance the possible of choosing this possible and helping them in the way people think, especially in the more vulnerable groups of the population, the Haredis and the Arab populations. Now in Google. So let us start with the positive sides. Of course, Israeli high-tech is burgeoning and innovation is flourishing, and if we talk about technology and innovation, then they do comprise a wonderful opportunity in the whole world, especially in Israel. And I think the way to look upon that is that the technological development is an economic and social opportunity and embedded in all that. But we also know that this opportunity is not an equal opportunity, because we know that the representation in high-tech does not always represent the right specific vulnerable groups. We saw when we talked about the chance and the probability reaching from those specific sectors, reaching those opportunities to the same degree. And it's very important to talk about that and give an opinion on that. I think there's tremendous attention being drawn to this social issue and the representation of the various sectors in high-tech. If for a moment I wear my hat of a representative of the Association of International Countries, the multinational countries here in Israel, the ITI, over the last 2-3 years, the majority of our meetings, especially our annual ones, emanated and focused on these social needs, because we actually identified these and the efforts that are exerted in this direction. But if I actually concentrate on these things that we look at from the Google point of view, we've been here for 13 years, and from the very first day, that was one of the subjects that are on our top, sort of in the top priority category. Now, why is this important? Why is it important for the commercial multinational countries to deal with these actual subjects? And that emanates from 3 causes. First of all, a healthy society is very important from a commercial point of view, from a business point of view, and for all our existence. And secondly, all of these factors have a direct connection to the economics surrounding us by bringing more people into the high-tech sector. That is one of the most important ways and the most efficient ways of meeting the needs of people in high-tech. So, for example, if we have the same number of women who are engineers, or representation from the Haredis and the Arab minorities, and they are represented to the right degree in these high-tech companies, of course, this has tremendous paramount importance. And the third reason is because simply we care. Yes, we simply care about where we are and our surroundings. Now, let us separate the various domains. I won't sort of go down to the high resolution, but if we are going to talk about high-tech and how it does reach out to the various groups in the population, is how do we ensure to these groups in the population to be enabled, and to all those who can and are capable of, short-term and long-term, to be part and parcel of the activities that we have defined here as high-tech. I think long-term, we know that one of the greatest world failures in the creation of engineering personnel in high-tech is that the number of young girls who decide to go in that direction is much smaller than those that we would have liked. Although, yes, the figure, the number of scientists, etc., and engineers, had it reached 50%, then it would have been a totally different situation. So if you look at what happened 10 years ago in Google, and now there have been thousands of girls, because they're trying to encourage girls in high schools and university to try and choose those directions. And those are the actual objectives, the long-term objections. How can we actually create that reserves within a matter of 10 years or more? So, and I'm actually already waiting sort of with bated breath to see that happening. There are other things that are much shorter term. One of the things that are very important to us, and that is the support of startups in Israel. Campus Tel Aviv, we initiated Google Startup for Campus. And this was initiated in order to support the entrepreneur ecosystem, the technological ecosystem, because there is a bold, a sort of vehement desire, 30,000 people in that specific complex with over 4,000 events, and so many startups and entrepreneurs there. But from the very first day, we wanted to give preference to those unrepresented or unworthily sort of represented, in other words, not sufficiently represented groups. Nowadays, they have their own complex and a fund that does invest in startups, and this has changed things significantly amongst the Haredi population, for example, alongside encouraging them to become entrepreneurs. There is Chasut, there's another actual association that encourages entrepreneurships, actually in entrepreneurialism in the Haredi. She Codes, for example, that encourages it at the short-term and interim term, trying to create 20,000 companies with 40,000 places of work, and they're really trying to lead these people into high-tech. In other words, they want to encourage more and more people, women and the various actual sectors of our population, into the engineering corner. And I think that in order to underpin this issue of taking a small step, I think in such ventures, even small steps can bring about great change, because very often you see this network effect, the ripple effect, because when you take successful entrepreneurs who become role models for the next generation of entrepreneurs, men and women from those specific sectors, and we see the exponential increase in that, one should never denigrate that, even if it seems a small step. And some of these things can only bring about greater change, of course. But just another aspect about society and technology, because we're talking about potential social gaps, etc. And so what we really want to see is how can we bring the development of innovation and technology to all the sectors and all around Israel, geographically speaking. Traditional industry, in order to remain something that really would flourish and would be supported, then it's very important that it must be the most competitive from a technological point of view. So one of the ventures that we carry out with the Ministry of Finance are tech factors that we actually do work with plastics and nutrition factories, the traditional factories, in order to bring in sophisticated cutting-edge technology so that they will be as competitive as possible. And ultimately, even the non-engineering aspect, like a shared venture with Joint on digital talent? How can we approximate people from all the sectors to those same opportunities and possibilities that exist in those digital world, that technology that needs to be used? Of course, some of those could be looked as kind of pilot studies with just first attempts. It's very important that the other sectors and the government take it based on scale. So that is of importance as well. But I'd also like to talk about my 4 startup campus that I mentioned in the Tel Aviv University. Yes, we are going to have so many entrepreneurs in the next few years, but so many of those who actually come, they are from the Tel Aviv area. But how can we now deploy this in other areas, either in the geographic and also cultural periphery? There are those who don't feel comfortable to be mixed in with the other groups of the population. So we can see how we can expand our campus activities in order to connect between communities and localities. So if we're already sort of connected with those from the Druze and Ethiopian communities, in order to see how we can bring them in and rope them in so that they will use the communications technology so that they can be part and parcel of those activities. And some of them are geographically close to Tel Aviv, but we want to make it more accessible to other parts of society and to other companies that work around in other places in Israel. There's such a desire on the industrial industry side, and so many of our companies and people I know, they spend their own personal time and their company time in order to approximate these people and find the pathways to them. And we're always open to hear additional ideas and to see how we can do these things in a better, efficient manner. Thank you very much, Yossi.
The whole issue of Startup Nation, it's a catalyst for including populations which are different, who until now were not involved in employment in the Israeli economy. And there's definitely a chance for something joint to do things together and to increase the occupational tool. Muhammad, you're doing a fantastic job in the sector and the Bedouin society. Let's hear a little bit about what you have to tell us. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I also had the honor to be a part of the president's team, and I think that the first request that we had, we said that the first discussion will be in the Bedouin village of Hura. And until I was in the discourse of the various tribes in Israeli society, I'm a Bedouin. I always lived in tribes. Our whole social structure in the Bedouin society is tribal, and I thought we are the only ones, and I knew how it actually delays the advance of the entire society because of this tribal structure. It prevents integration and connections, and suddenly I discovered it in a very ugly way in the Israeli society. And every elections there's another polarization, and the media that creates profiles for groups of people, and it created the Israeli ignorance. I, as a Bedouin, I hear about Haredi in the media. Tel Avivian hear about a Bedouin in the media, and it really makes it difficult, both for the government, but also it makes it difficult for the civil society to do an Israeli integration. And I'm saying it to you from a public experience. For 15 years I've been mayor, and I left it willingly in the last elections. But it was very difficult to tell people you could do things otherwise. Everybody tells you, look, the government is this, the Jews are that, the industry is such, and everybody creates a profile. Then you approach the industry and you say there's a fantastic human capital in the Bedouin society in the south. Why don't you take advantage of it, integrate? No, the Bedouins, they're all thieves, they're all drug dealers, and that's the profile they have of us. I had the privilege to be involved in a lot of processes in the Negev, from the beginning of establishing the Negev Council, and then 9 organizations in the civil society in order to integrate. But after I realized, in 2016, I approached the entire Israel society and I said, come in, talk to us, talk to the Bedouin society. We started with basics. For example, the army base, Nevadim, is within our villages. I went to the commander, he never heard of Hura, of my village. And so the army base, they came to visit the village every year. Why? Just to get to know it, the real village. Because there's a certain violence in the Bedouin society, but it's no different to the Israeli one. It's the same percentage, but it's very unique. You know that smuggling is only in Bedouins. The big tycoons, they're in Tel Aviv. So they give us a bad reputation because that's the critical mass in the Negev. And therefore, I think that connecting activity within the Israeli society will cause also less polarization in the Israeli society. I heard about the Haredi women and what's happening there as far as occupation, and I went to study from them. And after that, I did a partnership with Beit, the Haredi city. Then they came to me to see how I gave a free internet to all the residents. And then this experience also broke a lot of stigma among the two parties. And I think there are many, many opportunities. And you know, a nature of people, you always focus on the conflict, but conflict in the human ecosystem is less than 10%. If you take 2 people in the world, you find 90% common, and maybe they have some conflicts, 10%, but they invest all their energy in the conflict. And then there's no product, there's no movement, and all the time people are complaining that there's difficulty, and I saw that. I'm from the science world. I never knew anything about the public before I was mayor, and I saw that there's a complete adaptation between the change doctrine in materials to communities. Anybody that thinks that there'll be change in the communities without investment and without the process, it's not going to happen. You can complain till doomsday, but it brings you to a path that all the time you have to explain the problem, but you never think there's a solution. And this happens a lot in my community, that anybody you talk to, they say, look, you came from the academic world, you don't know anything about anything, and everything is right. But it's the opposite. You go to the government, you talk to them and say, look, you cannot work with the Bedouins. There's no partner, there's no leadership. All this is true, but they're both stuck in 2 levels, in 2 opposite directions in order to connect. I will also tell you about my next national mission, but as a mayor, within a very small local community, we managed to develop a new innovative approach, how to move the vector to solutions and how to be the better side of the government. We managed to have more than 16 pilots in a very small village, which is in the bottom of the Israeli society. Even Sigal is sitting here. You know, we have a small project that we started with the joint in 2007. Nobody believed this is a civil society. We invested 450,000 shekel, and this project eventually became the $500 million shekel project, working in 44 villages in the country. We developed it in Artsakh. And there are many more opportunities than problems, but people invest too much time and energy into the conflict. Thank you very much, Muhammad. Shira from the Finance Ministry. As Sigal told us, we see that there's a decline in the non-quality. We have become less polarized in the Gini index, and this decline, when you look at the data, derives mainly from the rise in the participation in the labor market. We see a trend that was around 2002, 2003 in the former economic crises, when the allowances were cut very significantly, and that caused a very significant rise in the rate of participation, especially of Haredi women, who really became part and parcel of the labor market. And as for looking at the entire income of the households, we see that the household is now based much more on income from work rather than from allowances. The growth that the Israeli labor market has experienced, we see that it really went down to the lower echelons. We see that the very low, medial, we see net income, which is growing by 3.6, as opposed to the net income of the entire household, which was 3.6. There's a better rise in the lower echelons than the higher one, and that's quite extraordinary in the international arena when we look at the various countries. And this actually says that the growth of the Israeli economy actually penetrated into the lower echelons, and that's very important in order to reduce inequality. And that derived as a result from steps taken by the government. Some of these steps were mentioned here before me, and nevertheless I'm going to mention a few steps that I think are important. One is the reduction of allowances for children. This really made a significant change in the labor market, and also the raise of the minimum wage, that also had an impact. The third thing, we talk about the education system. We heard about the gaps in the education system, also differential budgeting in education, which was already done in the elementary school and junior high, and we see that people from a lower social economic strata will get more than others, and that is critical according to the studies that have to do with scholastic achievements. What does a weak student need as opposed to the strong one? And we're talking about a whole change, because the education system is something that you have to look at the long term. It just ended now. We'd like to see the results, and I think it's very important that the government is going to follow and see the results, whether these resources are really given out very efficiently. But if they're not, then these achievements and these skills are not going to happen. So then it's not the right way to do it. In the high school, we are starting to introduce differential budgeting, and this too we have to follow up, and I suppose it's going to show in the very near future. These are just a few of the examples of what the government did, but nevertheless, I want to delve into the situation. When you look at the poverty data, although we are better, we still have poverty data that are very significant. And why? When we look into this, we see that actually 53% of the households that are poor actually are in the Arab and the Haredi society. But when we look at the people, we see that we're talking about 80% of the people. And so there should be a special attention to these sectors of the minorities and the Haredi. When we look at these sectors, there are a few characteristics that are different between the two. If we start to look at the Haredi sector, there was a real significant change regarding the cutting of allowances, and that gave an incentive to go out to work, and that's very important, so that we really will see a decline in poverty and the inequality regarding this society. From a study that we held in the Ministry of Finance, we see that a non-Jewish male. No, let's start first with the Jews and Haredi. The Haredi male who changes his work of place from a place of not working, like somebody who just studies, and he goes to the workplace, he sees all the benefits that he can get if he goes to work, then we see that when he goes to the workplace, he sort of loses all the benefits, which is about 2/3 of the salary that he's going to make if he goes to work. A Jewish man who is not Haredi, who actually changes from non-employment to occupation, he's only going to lose only 1/3 of his income. Therefore, there's a difference in the incentives to go out to work. And this is important to know, because we have to create incentives for everybody to go to the labor market. If we look at the Arab sector, it's different. When we talk about the study regarding mobility in society, although there's great inequality in the Israeli society, what's extraordinary is that there's a lot of mobility. Any child, if the parents were poor, he can advance. However, when we look at the transfer from the very lower echelon to the superior one, it's very difficult to climb all the way up. And that has to do, at the end of the day, that the dual economy that's talking about the high-tech sector, that's relevant also. And also we're talking about the geography. The social mobility is changing. Anybody who lives south of Tel Aviv and his parents are from the lower echelon, he's got only 5% of getting to the higher one, as opposed to somebody who lives in an affluent city. So it's very important to get to know these studies, because there are steps that have to be taken. When we look at the gaps regarding the achievements in the education system between Jews and Arabs, more than 60% derive from the Israeli education system. That's why I think it's very important. Regarding differential budgeting, this is quite significant, and the government started doing it in these contexts. And I think that we have to focus on the education system in the Arab sector later on as well, because a lot of the gaps are derived from there. And as for gaps in salaries, we see gaps also in genders between men and women. These gaps many times derive also from issues that we have to be aware of, and also the dual economy. We would like to see that the high-tech sector, which is the one with the greatest productivity in the Israeli society and very high wages and salaries, that it introduces today many more people with lower salary. It means women, that's the easiest integration. We see anybody who studies the profession, actually a woman is then employed in the sector, and the high-tech sector is the one with the highest mobility. We see that 67% of those children who come from a background that their parents are in the very low quintile, if they studied computer sciences, eventually they can get to the highest decimal. And this is very high mobility. And we would like to see more women, more Arabs who integrate into this sector, and more Haredi. These things are critical so that we see a reduction in the gaps among all these populations. And the last thing is important, since I spoke about dual economy, productivity in non-high-tech industries, because high-tech is only 12%. We must, as a government, and we are focusing on it, to raise the productivity in the other sector as well. That goes through skills of human capital. It has to do with the investment in infrastructure, and also geographical proximity of the social periphery to the center, and also bring occupation and reducing taxes and encouraging companies to go to the periphery. And then we can expand this discourse, and these are steps, and we'll do many more that will develop the productivity, like technology and etc. If we go to Yoav. First of all, let me start by saying that my CV is no longer valid. I'm no longer the head of the council. I left this post a year ago. Somebody else is now taking place. He's a professional, but he's also the representative of the population itself. And I'm saying it as an opening. It's not by chance that we are talking again and again about the problems and the conflicts begin when the light starts. Ask yourself, how many Haredi are sitting in this hall? How many Ethiopians do you see sitting here? How many Muslims are sitting next to you in this hall? How many Druze? Because there's no one Arab society. How many real people who have to cope with this life experience of being in the sideway, how are they part of the decision makers? Does anybody talk to them? Anybody voices their problems? Because until we get a voice, things are not going to change. We have a very distinguished conference here. It's very nice, and I really thank you for that. I'm not cynical. I thank you really for the fact that I had the privilege to participate. However, when you make a policy for people, you have to talk to the people, and not just to those people who manage to get as closer to the elite as possible, like me. For example, I am disabled, but I am a man and I'm academic. I look Ashkenazi. And I'm closest to elite as possible. And you have to understand this deeply, and you have to talk to the people, truly. There's nothing without us, about us without us. This is the real slogan to all the alienated populations. And another very important point, the second point, and very important, a few data. I said that I'm an academic after all. So it's very important to understand that the indices tell us all the things that we studied. So, for example, the data of poverty are those that are tested only to the analysis of the income rather than the expenses. Because if we have disability, it's much more. Because if you talk about accessibility to help and people in the periphery, they too have to consume medical help in the center. They're not always there. So you need to analyze their expenses as well because they're higher. And therefore, poverty data, the real ones are greater and larger than the ones, those appalling numbers that we just heard from Sigal. And this is much more important and much deeper. You have to know that. I'd like to say a word about people with disability. People, you know, we are not a tribe. We belong to all tribes. People with disability, we have Haredi, and we have Arabs. And we have Muslims, Jews, etc. As I said, there are secular Jews, there are settlers, there are leftists, people with disabilities. We belong to all the society in Israel and make them better. But when you come and talk about the integration of people with disabilities in the regular life, you cannot talk only about the fact that we are people with disabilities and delete and erase our other identities. Because when people talk about solutions for the Muslim society, you have to also talk about solutions to people with disabilities who are Muslims. If you talk about Haredi, the same thing. And you have to understand that in this context, most of the people with disabilities have to cope with alienation, doubly so. And when we talk about women, and by the way, arithmetically they're majority, but sociology they're a minority. So most of the they're women. All the women with disabilities are women that have double alienation because they're women and because they are with disability. And therefore, in the Israeli society, people with disability have a double or triple alienation, usually. And when I said talk to people, I meant to relate to their identity, to who they are. And their identity includes everything, with all the rifts. And last word about the role of the civil society. And I have the privilege, the great privilege, to represent the Issie Shapiro home, which is a wondrous organization. And I'll tell you how we do things. But before that, let me just say something about the civil society in general. The civil society is in a catch-22. Because the need and our will to change reality usually tackles the fact that most of our activities to change policies, for that we need the support of donors. And the support of donors, many times, people who benefit from this situation, because the connection between capital and government is quite obvious. And the gaps are created by the fact that there's a policy in Israel and in other places as well, that the allocation of richness of monies is concentrated in the hands of very few people. There is a lot of money, but belongs to very few people. So these two people are the philanthropists, and they are the ones who actually motivate the civil society, and it's in a catch-22. And it cannot really do things in catch-22. How do we solve this problem in Issie Shapiro? And maybe this is the right method to work. We, together with the philanthropist, we create real partnerships. And we create together with them good services, excellent services for every problem that we identify. We create the services together with the people for whom we are offering these services. So nothing about us without us. That's a really true thing. And we take these services and we turn them into a professional discipline, and we can then train other people, and we can duplicate it, and also many times also by legislation, in order to turn it into to compelling the government. They don't really want to join and jump on our cart. Thank you very much.
The next question is, how can your organization, what are those activities that you carry out in order to promote the president's desire to unite between the various tribes in the world, in society, in the various organizations, companies, etc.? So Yossi, the efforts that we need to exert are on various dimensions, but I think that the lights at the end of the tunnel are something that we are basically aspiring for. And one of the work that we did was in Comotech, and they did their first external sort of event on the campus 3 years ago. It was an experimental event to see how can we take Haredi women who are already working in industry, but from a statistical point of view, in industry they work with lower wages, it's sort of in lower positions. And we wanted to see whether we're capable of preparing a program where we could give them that boost and sort of help them promote themselves. Not only was it very successful, but, and I have spoken some of those who know the actual program, who have actually participated in it, and their wages have been doubled even and promoted. So I remembered the network effect that we spoke about, the fact that for every role model or every example of success immediately inspired a new generation of other people who were doing similar things or identical things. So these created kind of collaborations because we wanted to bring people from the Haredi group in the population. Don't forget that in Startup Nation Central, we've got a program. How can you promote various school curricula and different seminars and see how the graduates from these programs, also from the Haredi and also from the Arab populations, we can help direct them so that they would be trained not only in the framework of their studies, but additional things beyond their just study years, so that they would be more ready for industry later on. In other words, we would be really preparing them. So that light at the end of the tunnel, as we hear how they have become heads of teams in various places around the country, just thanks to that little sort of push that we gave them ahead. And there are additional examples of that as well. I think that there should be an ongoing effect and effort, because there are other companies who are carrying out programs with the Haredis, with women, with Arabs. And just as I mentioned, one of those programs with women in the field of employment, other companies take the initiatives with other companies. And we, of course, are obligated and committed to continue this. If we're talking about digital talent or supporting growth, thus in Israel, we're talking about over 1,500 startups, and we want to reach 5,000, in fact, ultimately. So I'm not only talking about the startups, but we're talking about a very wide diversity of companies that could become very influential factors in our economy. So when I talk about these startups, only 5% or less than that percentage of startups do reach the success stories that hit the headlines. And therefore, every little itsy bit of help that can be given is definitely something that we should welcome. I think that not only in the periphery, but I think that one thing that we should voice an opinion of in our state is to enhance the connectivity, the sort of the bonding between all parts of the country. Now, what I'm talking about, I think we should have not only media, sort of telecommunications that are better, but all the connectivity between all the parts, transport, and because we're no much better than the other, for example, than the people who live in the Bay Area of California, but because of the transport, that is one of the ways, and that is one of the ways that we as a state will be able to award much better economic employment and entrepreneurial opportunities to all the sectors. So the more we want to bring employment to more places, then we'll be able to award more opportunities in a swifter manner and better manner. So I think we ought to look at that in earnest. Michal, in brief, because it's drawing near to the time of the closure. An additional opportunity that we've been working on recently, which also emanates from the United States, is regentrification in urban sort of regentrification and innovation. We're talking about $4 million for this urban and social renovation and gentrification. In other words, that there's so many people from the vulnerable strata of our population cannot remain there because suddenly the land value is really spiraled. So we want to duplicate something that happened in the policy in the Clinton administration. So you're actually investing in the infrastructure of that neighborhood, but ensure that a very high percentage of the older population, not in age terms, will remain. And so you give them for example, their rent subsidized for 20 years. So you rebuild like the Amidar neighborhoods, Migdal Emek, Lod, and other places, especially where there's a mixture of Haredis, Jews, Arabs, that they're drawn in to live together. So it's not only a social investment, but also an economic one, and developing all the services, education, help, community activity centers, activities from the age of 0 till 120. And those are activities that have succeeded in all the states in the United States over these years. And it's very moving and exciting to see it after 6 years of an effort that was exerted. So the first venture was actually really initiated here as well. And I think that that will be one of the key programs when we're talking about the impact on mobility, social mobility, geographic mobility. Mohammed, what's in the pipeline? I think in my last term of office as the mayor of Hura, I decided that I would retire from public life, and we took what we had developed in Hura as an approach, and it really changed all the statistics there. We're talking about eligibility for matriculation exams. It was only 18%, and it really did peak. And we're talking about the Bedouin population going to the actual universities, etc. And there's so many data that we felt had truly changed and were transformed. In the Negev, the Bedouin, for example, they're 50% of the metropolitan of Beersheba, a little less than a third of the population in the Negev. And so they're really a center of gravity there. So there's frustration, there's a lack of trust in the government on their part, but there is a deep understanding that this should not be neglected, and therefore the government and of the local authorities to deal with that. So I thought that Amir Levy, Ayman Nusaf, Jeff Schwartz, people who have done things in their lives, to actually create some kind of accelerator in the Bedouin population, so to really turn them, instead of being a burden, but to a real growth engine. And if you look at it, you can see that 14 years of a median there, 80% of them are below the age of 30 from the point of view of age, and 80% is what you normally find around the country. So this would do so much good to the Bedouin population, because the challenge is not only that of the Bedouins, but they themselves. There will be a chaos, and from a demographic point of view and other aspects. So really, that it will be suddenly this whole area will be less attractive to live in. So if we do not bring that critical mass to be a true growth engine and one of significance in that area, then only then will we be able to change things. So we took the joint example, what the joint does. There was no entity before that really holistically looked at a solution for the Bedouins. They said education, then they disconnected that from housing, then they educated that from employment, instead of holistically transforming this problem, but together. So we wanted to award some kind of hope to the people graduating from high school, so they would be part and parcel of that sense and experience of success, rather than just being there sort of at the side and it wouldn't only be pinpointed to them, but we wanted the whole of Israeli society to look at it as a challenge and interface with it in a more successful manner. I know that time is of the essence, so I'll say in 3 sentences that the continuation of encouraging growth whilst permeating this to the lower strata, socioeconomic strata, taking all those steps I spoke about. I could expand, but time is of the essence. But just pinpointing it, well, of course, the improvement of skills for the Arab population, incentives for going out in and joining the work market. We spoke about men and Arab women. And high-tech, Yossi expanded on that, but I won't actually expand anymore on that issue. But in brief, just 3 points. I, as a representative of civil society, suggest partnership between the business sector and the government, but a truly fully fledged partnership. And Yossi, technology is a wonderful opportunity to be a true town center that would strengthen democracy and rope in the public and let them share what they're doing. Please take this as a challenge, this gauntlet of challenge. I am begging you that this should happen. And finally, the equality value in the State of Israel is actually being threatened the whole time in the State of Israel. The only way to really deal with it can only be through an interpretation in the court law, in the law and in the courts, and therefore we need full egalitarian rights that should be applied and implemented through legislation. So stop threatening equality, please reinforce it. Sigal, just if you could wrap things up for us. I just wanted to say a few things in order to really wrap it up and summarize. I think I'd like to take your imagination as a picture. Hura 10 years ago, maybe 13 years ago even, there was a problem with employment amongst the Bedouin women, a very low ratio of women, but a star, Dr. Mohammed Al-Nabari, who was the former mayor. Now, what can one integrate between girls who parents of girls, and they're not willing them to go to Beersheba? So you don't need only the consent, but all other conditions. After all, you talk about a healthy society leading to a healthy economy. And so just close your eyes for a moment and imagine, and this is real, an actual mosque in Hura where the mayor says, let us here establish a call center for Bezeq, the telephone company, and they would work there, the girls, until that kind of trust and confidence for these girls to then embark on their journey to Beersheba and start working there. And then move that call center to Beersheba. And so I asked one of the young girls who'd come to the mosque to work what her aspirations were. She barely spoke Hebrew, and she turned around to the head of the team. I'm taking over from him in a year's time. So everything and anything is possible. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now Professor Yafa Zilbersach, the chair of the Planning and Budgeting Committee, who also worked very, very